Good evening and welcome back to Third Thursdays, an evening of poetry. I'm Deborah Schoen and I usually work with Francine Brown over at the Francis Lehman Loeb Art Center over at Vassar College, but due to the pandemic, the college is closed. So Francine Brown at the Loeb has been sharing programming virtually called The Loeb at Home with live lectures and links to their collection. You can sign up for weekly newsletters at fllac.vassar.edu. That's fllac.vassar.edu. Since we know a whole lot of nothing about the future, the Adriance Memorial Library will be hosting the poetry programs the third Thursday of the month, and we will be taping the event where the link will be available on our website and the Loeb's website as part of the Loeb at Home series. So for next month, July 16th, we will feature Roberta Cold, and August 20th, we will feature Carl Schmitz, and we plan to have them live and also invite the public to come see them at Adriance, as well as taping them for people who don't feel comfortable coming out in public. But tonight we have Sean Foley. He's a former Marine, failed architect, long restoration expert, and poet. Sean has been writing poetry for 35 years and has studied under Stephen Sandy, Marilyn Nelson, Nick Flynn, Vivi Francis, and Samia Bashar. So tonight is not live. We don't have a public audience. So if I'm just going to give Sean a welcome, a nice warm Poughkeepsie welcome. Thank you so much for coming here and being with us tonight.
Hello. I'd like to start by acknowledging that this is a very difficult time right now in our country and in the world. It's a difficult time to write, but poetry is still very important. And I think in whatever comes out of these experiences we're having, my hope is that we'll be a better country, and poetry will be a part of that. So the first poem I'd like to do is a poem that I wrote a couple of years ago at a writing workshop in Provincetown, Massachusetts, at the Fine Arts Work Center. I took a class with Vivi Francis, and one of the exercises she had us do is we paired up with another student, and we had to write a poem in that person's voice, study their poems, and write a poem in that person's voice. I was paired up with a young poet named Ama Kojo, who was an African-American woman. Is a very good poet. And I tried to write a poem in her voice. It was also a time where we were separating children from their parents at the border, and especially that summer. It was a time also of great upheaval, so it's reflected in that. And I'd like to preface this poem by saying that I am the son of an immigrant mother. My father was the son of an immigrant mother. My father's father was the son of immigrant parents. I can remember a time in my childhood, before Dr. King died, where there was this tradition of giving an African violet to a new neighbor to welcome them to the neighborhood. So this poem is called Welcome, after Ama Kojo. Into the frayed circle of my brow rings praise to grow the cotton leaf flower blooming violet for the untying of strangers. My wish for you is but milk sugar borrowed in refrain, the damp child held to the hour of all fathers. Why is each new world a stranger to the next? The river of shoes walks back to blues inked into a garden, help held, bonded into an impatient universe of fury and birds pressed into ribs. Every prayer is a cage also, filled with the names of those I have eaten, unfeathered, struck, nursing dizzying wounds through distances. All of knowledge is apology. I give to you the pomegranate at the heart of the lion. I crush to my chest every child as if holding a handful of berries, an armful of berries. Stain to me this family of people, stem and root, calyx and corolla. Turn us towards the rising, open our hands to the sun. All my life I have been told over and under again, there is not enough to go around. Yet I want still for every emptiness to be filled. Within this often bitter and beautiful earth, taste it in any flower. A voice as morning sunlight carrying breeze unburnt. As a child, I did not know what I wanted, only that I wanted, that I was filled with wanting, crying out often to no effect. For every child unmothered at a border, I cry out as a child, learning each uncomprehending new wail in an empty throat. I have never forgotten. My coppered skin flinches still. I was once the child waiting by the fire with a plate. My plate ever empty, I hold it out again to be filled. No one ever needs to tell any of us when there is not enough. I wanted to begin with an early poem that I wrote about 35 years ago when I first got out of the Marine Corps, because it is a poem about isolation, and we've been experiencing a lot of isolation recently. And I realize now, looking back, that I was suffering from what would now be called PSTD. When I was living alone in a one-room apartment, going to work in the day, writing at night. And I'd like to dedicate it to my youngest sister, Catherine Foley, and two of her girlfriends, Kathleen Fitzgerald and Jean Lynch, who were in high school at that time and just got their driver's license and had come to visit me. And we're in a way part of this. They didn't know what I was doing. I was just the crazy older brother living alone. In this one room, and they used to come to visit me. So they recently had a reunion because they all turned 50, right before the shutdown. And I met them in the Catskills for a hike, and I had told them about this poem. So I'd like to dedicate it to them. And I haven't read this poem in many years. Here we go. It's called Lovelace Dentistry. Dinner was over. Often it began like this, simply, past dark. There was no television, no want of one. Often of habit, I ate tuna from a can. I would walk around afterwards with the fork in my mouth, tasting metal against my teeth. The only sink was small and shared in the bathroom at the far end of the wooden hall. My room mostly bare and clean, a small desk, a small refrigerator, a dresser painted gray like a filing cabinet, books. An odd ink stain on the floor, on the wooden floor near the door. A few clippings taped neatly to the walls. A small reading lamp on by the bed. Nothing more. I had come home from work. I had come back from the service. I had come back from St. Thomas and Providence in New York City. I had come back to the town I grew up in. I had one room above some real estate offices, an office on the main road through town, a road called something like East Middle Turnpike or Center Street, an old route, first with one number and then two. There was a new highway being built just outside of town, and sometimes its echoing, slow mechanical noise traveled in. During the day, from where I went to elementary school, you could look over and see small clouds of dust rising from the work. The excavations had gone on for years, mostly while I was away. Nearly finished now, there was new, yet to be opened tiers of interchanges to the east and west and to the north. Seemingly, strip mining equipment had moved seemingly heroic quantities of rock and earth, slowly going until what was being made looked normal. Some 6.5 million cubic yards of earth reimagined, to include in its disappearance the whole area of a park where a bright, beautiful girl and I had once tried to make love by laying our school uniforms down in a field. If you could get close enough, 60 feet below what had been a rough green surface, oversized equipment stood quietly lined in rows on bared red earth, waiting to be dismantled, to be taken away to the next job site in some other state. Though I had no way of knowing yet, within a year I would be a foreman for the company whose name was printed on the equipment. Tonight, the town itself was still physically mostly unchanged, but wouldn't remain so for long. I had gotten my old job back at the nursery where I had worked during high school. There was no plan of staying. I was saving up to go away again. The smart kids I had known in school had finished college long ago. I had a bicycle I still loved. I was fit and odd. Even in my middle 20s, I didn't drink coffee yet. Never thought of beer. Most of the foremen at the nursery are athletes of a kind trying to stay physically attached to some better self. I had been a Marine, the very last thing I would have ever thought in high school. The older owner of the nursery called us grunts, so we called ourselves grunts. It was 6 10-hour days per week, irregardless of weather. This night was early in November, past the time change. There was 5, maybe 6 weeks left in a 9-month nursery season. There was the specific effort of holding on. Some crews had dropped out already, exhausted. Others tired and anxious, yet full of wishful thinking that winter would come and be easier. That particular fall may be especially cold and rainy. The weather, even then, went to my hands and bones. Sometimes I was so wet and cold, my teeth hurt. So we went to work in the dark and came home in the dark. The leaves had gone from the one maple between my room and the road. The offices were mostly empty. I would take off my boots and muddy clothes on a back porch and make my way through the desks and chairs in my underwear. Upstairs, before I could lay down to read, I would take a shower first and eat and look out the window at the traffic and at the buildings across the street. I have looked for months now before I understand the sign says Dr. Lovelace. In a large picture window, a woman, all in white, has her fingers in someone's mouth. From my room above the real estate offices, I can see the bottoms of the patient's shoes and imagine his tonsils. She is above him. He is laying back at her waist with his eyes closed. She holds a silver mirror on a silver wand to a hole in his head. Her shoulders are bent in the universal posture of effort, bent to a wheel somewhere above his Adam's apple. The traffic in the street between us has long thinned past rush hour. Her light alone shines with industry. Aware that this is late work like any other, thinking it must be an awful job to have someone else's saliva all over your hands all day, I wait for the long, blank trailer to move forward before I can look at her again to see if she is enjoying it at all. There it is something familiar, close but divided by first and last military haircuts, and a wandering of jobs that were nothing but a walk through a gate with a paycheck. There is the girl who took me to her senior prom who wanted to be an hygienist. The girl I spent until 4 a.m. with my tongue in her ear, trying to hear whether I should put my hand into her pants, whose breasts I remember, if only because they were breasts. It rained the next day, so we couldn't go to the beach like you're supposed to after a prom. And I sat around with pictures of her older brother in the army, politely marching between small kitchen and smaller living room, making fast friends with her mother and younger sisters. We went to the drive-in that night in her father's car, and the next day, Sunday, I helped him replace a cheap above-ground swimming pool with one I'm sure is equally old and rusted now. I remember her father sent me out in his car with the youngest son to get bigger washers at the lumber yard. And when we got back, the kid told him I drove too fast. The old man just looked at me until I looked away, and we finished the pool. It would be hours filling. Her mother was very happy and offered me a pair of Joey's stationed in Hawaii trunks. I said no, that I had to go home to see if my parents were asking had I gone to church. For me, there would be another year of Catholic high school. I went home that night after the prom to call another girl. And after late mass, went out to her, this other girl, as if by appointment. I would fall in love with her so soon. Love in some ways deeper than what I felt for my own parents. Neither of us could know yet what this would mean. Our love was difficult. When it was over, it was like they say, pulling teeth. For a girl who did not believe in God, still she found ways to use words like always and forever. I was the cautious, unimaginative one. After her graduation, we ran away together. I came back without her. You knew that. She was taller, braver, faster, and more beautiful. And what she could see, I could not know. I could not keep up, even as I tried, mostly everything. Does it mean anything if I tell you this was at the end of the 70s in America? Her car had reclining bucket seats, a subcompact in which we would lie back close together. And for hours at a time, I found myself awkwardly stretched open and then wider, unknowingly in need of such help. With time, I became her patient. Those evenings, I entrusted her to her care, some part of me to clean that I could not clean. True, there was pain there, but of course I could not see to know why. Neither one of us was any real doctor. Yet, no one deserves such care. I didn't. I was, for a short while, what's commonly diagnosed as lucky. To be in her chair, she would look closer and find just inside of me, in my mouth, all that was soft and at the beginning of decay. And she filled those places with her very mercury, a sweet metal tasting of warmth, almost liquid, at first bright and palpable, and only vaguely then, of silver. Hers was an amalgam for all I was, an identification still I carry within me, so to name me, against some careful record, long after what is this body burned away. That's the first poem I ever kept. It was by a very young man. So I never dealt with the Marine Corps. I wrote one poem called Pancakes that was pretty innocuous about the Marine Corps, and I didn't look back for 30 years. Until I started meditating. I went to a 6-day silent meditation retreat. A motion detector, yeah, I'll move more. I went to a 6-day silent meditation retreat, and I started on the 4th or 5th day, I started to have flashbacks to Weapons Training Battalion in Parris Island, which I hadn't thought about for years, and never talked about. And I realized that my neighbor across the road had been shooting assault rifles every night after dinner for about a year and a half. And I knew that it bothered me. but I didn't know that it drove me nuts. And I sat down to write about that. And in the process of writing this, try to discover some humanity, some connection with somebody that I felt deeply unconnected with. And that effort still speaks to the time we're going through. And this was at a time of mass shootings. So this called to empty a rifle. Simply in a sound, in my own cul-de-sac, memory repeats to me again in the sound of news stories. A younger neighbor, often after dinner, in his own yard, casually practices with friends and emptied cans, what to him is his own freed version of survival. Hundreds of rounds in an evening, not hunting. In that his weapon is familiar to me, like a tone of voice. Its unforgotten tenor turns to my heart, its sound involuntarily cocking my head like a dog. The seemingly connected, continuous percussive bursts, distinct but hollowed, carried from uphill and across a road into my hard-won acre of wood, acres I barely own. Simply the same evening in Las Vegas, 470 shot with 1,100 rounds in a crowd of 22,000, a type of war, a misidentification. Individual choice seems to begin without end. Civilians want military weapons as playthings to own, for better or for worse, for the protection of one's family. When honestly, most often, we can't protect ourselves from ourselves. At midlife, my own hearing is partially lost to the parts of sound, my own abstracting of war and no war. The repeated hammer and discharge does not burn off, even at this distance. Even my neighbor at his rifle range, where he toys even mid-morning Sundays. I am still watching my younger self struggle to stay attached to the earth, praying never to have to shoot anyone. After the Marine Corps, I once described the sound of rifle fire at Weapons Training Battalion, Paris Island, as your younger brother banging on broken linoleum with a broken radio antenna in an empty house. What it is really like is laying on the ground learning to behave with dignity while being abused. Simply, the drill instructor bends down and theatrically screams in your face until you hit a bullseye. Experience thoughtless relief as a bullet strike near to center mass, then more shouting, and then nearer again to another. In training, there is no freedom in any of it. Ask any god or dog. The whole process is simple. You wrap the shoulder strap around your arm like a tourniquet, pull the trigger between breaths. The plastic stock in your hands feels like nothing. That I could not leave did not help. In boot camp, I had no house I could sell, no illusion of any freedom I could buy with any amount of money. Though I thought I chose, there I could not will myself to love the smell imminent from the spark of a bullet. I would give to you, my neighbor, any former uniform if I thought it could in any way help you to stop. I know that my own heart stops. All of sound eventually stops. Willingly or unwillingly, I know the body is the actual site of all pain. The grid of steam pipes on this island overhanging all my training. I know the diagrammatic, direct way in which any body betrays itself in the very simplest of stress positions. Even now, I feel the aggression beaten to me from before Paris Island, but made larger there to look like the outline of a torso and a head as each target moves farther away. 500 yards to tear the body with something that weighs less than a dime, as close or as far as a neighbor. My home in effective range of my neighbor's weapon. Yet I insist we are our actual physical bodies, made vulnerable. And only after wounding, after you've had hands inside of you, can happiness be the physical experience of escaping the body. Swim out and back. Swim out as far as you can go and see if you can make it back. Physically test physical boundaries. To lie in dirt, not knowing how you got to shore, propping yourself so your face is just inches above the surface of the earth. How badly the lungs can hurt. The risk can seem insignificant. The wet sand glistens. The shadows of the other bathers waver on the wet ground, each one's physical experience private. I do not want to be part of any grouping, a clustering of tears clustered in red, signifying some form of success. The pierced heart of another, even if that other is a person-sized outline on a piece of paper. I only want to hear the call to pull down all targets from behind the protected area, behind a berm. To know again the relief, to be made so simply safe for an hour at a rifle range. This is my rifle. There are many like it, but this one is mine. So yes, I was once so tired holding a rifle I could swim no further away from myself, but was swept further. Went out, away from my one apparent body, away from pain, towards no other sight. My heart stopped in bright light without sound. I watched briefly as strangers, there was no other word but worked on me until I came down from above. And so made some cell unrecognizable, left to oxidize as lead in a swamp. The chant is unclear because it is our own, because it is too close. Memory does not truly adhere among the often mindlessly cruel stories of Betty Lou and the crushing of some yellowbird's head, chants only to keep one cadence in a hollowness of boredom. My heart's hand keeps closing, pulled again towards hiding, beating one child while holding another, still taken to knee, waiting by the wan edge of a pine wood. I can know there are trees above me, but can still not now remember any shade. My unpolishing boots, undried, embittered, yellow pollen thickening the ground like brass and sand everywhere. You are your body, and my body is mine. The muscles of the heart stop growing at age 10. Science articles can tell me that the boundaries of the skin are ever changing, that each at our surfaces emerge holding again our container's youngest cells, that we are renewed constantly, and that each in a way is a way for sound to enter and for boundaries to be broken. Tell to me of your injuries. I myself have never been shot, never exploded. My family and most of my neighbors never shot at. At 56 of hard use, pieces broken, healed, partially healed, removed, is to admit at some private shore that the only pleasure spot left on my body is at the top of my head. Scar is simply scar, unchanging tissue, the reminding of an illustrated forgiveness, the unlike discolored regions of one's skin, the very cells that once saved me. Yet, we are mostly identified as divisions of repeating cells. The New York Times can tell me the every part of this, and also that it is an illusion, that these are the same legs, that these are not the very same arms I had as a child. An illusion in which the stray marks of forgiveness remain immediately, intimately apparent. Every cell, excepting those inside of the eye, every bone, every bit of unbroken skin, the cerebellum, accepting the often untouched scars. The blood, each piece in plain fact, is different from what we were born with, or what was yours 7 years ago, 1 year ago, 33 and a third years ago. Pick a number. Cells so bonded in an ellipse of exchange and erasure, seemingly more quick than any one finger could possibly rewrite. I do not decide this. Our bodies, so like pleasure, elude permanence. We persist by being constantly replaced. Our newest combatant cells, so innocently arriving, their impermanent outlines, petitioning protection. A neighbor's seemingly thoughtless, often ending, starting again noise. Fellow bather, to whom can I say I know your practice, but not your purpose, this close-shouldered, nightly emptying of rounds? Oh, undistant sound, remind me of just how very close I did once listen, voluntarily. Press your upper body up from wherever this self has now found another washed ashore. From whatever piece of this earth your arms are now on, from what was hurt, what was lost, from what did or did not recover. Trammel between the emptying sounds, the sound of ringing, beaten now to the beach of my bared yard, the other of your supposed isolation. This errant of privacy is not yet the hurt or loss of today. It is the previous vanishing war, calling to a sea, the lost bodies and animate lying in waves, pulling in a continuousness of repeating. The flatted arcs inchoate past ascension, slowing, brief, without return, out past any target or berm, willingly or unwillingly, in repetition. My body, my country, 'tis thee. Stand in littered sand, walk away from hollowed sounds. Stand up and walk. I'm good. This last poem was a very difficult poem to write, and some surprising things happened at the end of it for me. And my grandfather came up in a coda to this poem. And I'll finish with this one tonight. It's called The White House. I lived in the White House. I did. I took the columns out, lay them down on the front lawn on big sawhorses. The columns were old then. I took them apart, glued them back together again, put them back in place. The columns looked better after my work. I lived in the White House. Why not? It fit 2, maybe 4, maybe 6 of the house I grew up in, completely inside, including the roofs, with rooms left over for spares, full of a history which I thought I lacked. Except at night, the White House stood mostly empty, except for a woman trapped, like a caged bird, singing, needing help. I lived in the White House, briefly. I did not belong there. I lay in the big bed, no Lincoln, no Jefferson, opening doors to an endless kitchen. I wandered in the empty rooms, fixing things. There was so many things to fix. I was generous with work. I lived in the White House. I explored to find there is no secret bunker, no situation room underneath. Only a wine cellar. And after a few glasses, no one looks all that elected. I was no president, couldn't be, though for a while I had dual citizenship. Believe me, there is no president anywhere I knew how to find. Only a son, always a son of some kind. So I had to leave another country. I ran off to India with the First Lady. She was very fit and even had a high horse that did yoga. Had a grand theory for everything. She was so angry so much of the time, yet had very good social skills. She liked complicated symphony, always to swoon, generous in moods. I was a carpenter, and she was a lady. We were long past having babies, and I loved her. I didn't care that I didn't understand the language. I still so barely understand. Eventually some spells do wear off. All that dressage starts to become real work. I worried about passport control and lost track of all the cocktail parties and who owed an invitation to whom. I was never very good at keeping names straight. How quickly I got unwell and had to go to a hospital where all the doctors had books for short sale. And there was the better food. Trying so hard to leave, I stood on some crowded steps, hoping for pictures. Honestly, I don't have the 1,000 words it took from me. Met so formally with my own birth family, couldn't go home again. No new tears would shed, no child inside. I no longer had a wife. So I went back to the White House and finished building a garden off the west porch. There was a fountain there, showing a boy clutching a porpoise. I worked hard giving him just the right catheter. I had cast myself out then, as far as I knew how. I thought there would be more gardens. Living out of my truck and out of hay, I told the office, hey, a barn that doesn't get paint falls down. A dam fills up with much mud and becomes a puddle if the valves aren't exercised. Fences fall down and let the animals out. It's more than husbandry, you know. I wasn't nominated. Out of work and mad at a war and some son of a president, I took whatever it was I thought I learned, and in the famine of my own citizenry, escaped seemingly forever to Europa. I worked in a museum there, a laboratorio, washing under magnification the darkened candle smoke from Jesus' feet. I bought such small, intricate tools and fine brushes and jars of precious pigments signifying earth, none of which were bright white. Yet salt mixed with water and aqua alta rose frequently. In Venice, the winter skies grayed, my wallet soaked and dried often. Much to my surprise, I found myself missing scaffolding and long hours. In time, I learned how American I was. I missed, most of all, being so physically, gratefully tired from work. The White House drew me back simply by promising the grandest view atop a freshly stripped roof and rope thick enough to keep climbing. I had listened to enough speeches to know to keep fundraising. I was at home with the unelectable, the unchosen, and the hungry. I would more or less show up at the border each morning anyways. A reappearance, so to speak, a stepson offering portfolio I couldn't open and didn't want to lose. Unbelievably, I stayed put. For 20 years, one season at a time, I quit each and every single livelong day. I honestly don't know where the time went. Nothing simply vanishes. There was more buildings, some very beautiful. I fixed and painted all that was allowed. Each and every last piece will need paint again so soon. So I rode away on a bicycle bought with borrowed funds, in debt as always, and still myself, whatever that might mean. Still in need of a haircut and a shine, boots, no great shoes. Left the tuxedo. Employed myself and others. Got arthritis so bad, had to stop signing my name to things. Then the last of the lead paint finally ran out. I don't know how the clothes still fit. Must have been hard work. Every last hair on the body changes. Styles come and go. Milk paint chips under bridges. All of that. Not sure what I expected. The columns are still there. The garden survived. though eventually others took care of it. Only in looking back do plants ever appear to grow slowly. How magically the trees become larger. The White House is still white, keeps getting paint, survives, has lots of help. They eat the weak. Don't be weak. People talk, and then they talk about something else. Unoccupied buildings are more or less silent. None but dates are ever on tests. So quit or don't quit already. Inherit wind. Save your money. Write your own damn poem. Never go fuck yourself. Never wish that on anyone. Never wish. I was not husband, nor heir, nor owner, nor thief. I was the most privileged of worker among workers. There was a well for me at the very back of the White House that contains the most common substances of blood and of stunned silence, of drunkenness and of love and in the suffering of love, and of my own thoughtless hands, and of the failed care of each other. I entered after so brief a surprised cry and fall to scrub the well's concrete, stained fresh with the first substances. Also, to finally wash and then wrap with ritual care the casualties' familiar paintbrushes. George Odell, of whom I knew nothing, but as a painter, now a broken body, ascendant via helicopter ambulance to that place at which we all arrive. Week 2 of a job of 20-odd painted years. Death can come at the beginning or the end of any long story of wind. There are no columns behind the White House. Life gives us many versions of one body. Only on a page does one choose one's birth. In wounded clarity, my grandfather, after his fall of stories from scaffolding to a New York City sidewalk, claimed to have opened his eyes and, looking up at the gathered spectators, said, "Get back to work, everybody." I inherited him, not you, or you, or you. This is a coda. It came the day I got back from my cousin Doreen's wedding. She's a 4-time cancer survivor and didn't feel safe enough to, her mother died of cancer. And she didn't feel safe enough until she was in her mid-40s to get married herself. And on my grandfather's side, there's 27 of us cousins, grandchildren. And a lot of the men were all in their 50s now, and they all, in the face, look like my grandfather, who died many years ago. And I got home. I had just finished that poem, and I wrote this. It's called This Work of Shaming. My grandfather said, "If you ever think you're being treated unfairly, do your job so well, it shames them." Define fair. This one directive leaves room for little else. A lifetime can go by trying to shame people who are not listening, who barely know you exist, who you yourself barely know exist, except in feelings, anger, impingement, hurt. This one wisdom from the broken man guides what? Over a lifetime. Extrapolate any bitter pride over decades, a lifetime of layoffs and downturns and having the one beer to have when having more than one. To all seven children and the Depression and war and the beginning of the Teamsters. What a quixotic thing to tell an 11-year-old. I missed the obvious information at 19, conveyed by the pieta of his so obviously broken body as I lifted him from his last hospital bed, as the orderly spread fresh white sheets. No one but those you love are buried on top of you. It's something he used to say all the time. Thank you.